Well, good morning and welcome to another week of Journey with Christ. I'm your host, Mark Mitchell, a preaching minister at the Park Avenue Church of Christ here in Charleston, West Virginia. And I'm joined, as always, by Steve Fox, a preacher for a long time.
A long time.
So how you doing today?
I'm doing okay, except when I think about how long I've preached.
Well, I went through 1 year of your sermons, one 30-minute Sunday, so, you know.
Did you?
No, I'm just kidding you.
Hey, there's some gems in there somewhere. I have boxes of them. Some of them given away, some of them still have. But there are gems in there.
Oh, there are.
You just have to look real hard.
No, I know several people who have made the comment to me, "Oh, Steve's my favorite preacher."
Oh, gee. Well, you need to quit talking to Susie all the time.
No, it wasn't Susie.
Because it sure wasn't her. When we moved from Arkansas to my first full-time job, which was at Elkview here in Kanawha County, and we were packing up everything. I was getting ready to graduate. And already had the job, and we were going to travel north. And Susie had worked for the athletic director at Harding for 2 years. And they were really close. And so Susie's in there packing a bunch of stuff in her office. And the athletic director comes in and he says, "What are you doing?" She said, "Well, I'm getting some stuff ready because we're going to leave tonight." And he said, "Oh yeah, I forgot Steve has a job, doesn't he?" Susie said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, listen, don't unpack the boxes, because I've heard him preach." And we lived there 20 years.
Oh, nothing like the vote of confidence.
No, and those are my friends.
Yeah. Well, no, Steve, you have made a huge impact on a lot of people. So, and we're grateful for all the things you have done.
Well, there's a whole lot of stuff that came back from other people towards me too. Because, you know, I grew up in Ohio, and I always kind of second-guess myself. What would my life been like if Susie and I had moved to Cleveland? I don't know. I have no idea. I just always wondered what it would be like. But West Virginia kind of grows on you.
It does.
Yeah, good. Man, when I first got here, what's that called? Cultural shock. Phew.
Yeah, I remember the very feeling that I had when, at 12 years old, we moved from Lincoln County, West Virginia, to Lubbock, Texas, with Dad went to preaching school, and that's a 500,000 population city at then, with Texas Tech University and everything. I was like, whoa.
I mean, it was different than Hamlet?
It was different than Hamlin. Well, if you will get your Bibles out, we're going to be in Luke chapter 15, discussing the things that are lost in the parable of which is, without a doubt, the most popular parable of Jesus. And I mean, there's been probably more books written about this particular parable than any other parable that I can think of. The prodigal son. But we're going to take a look at all three of them. And last week we did cover the lost sheep, but we're going to hit it and cover it in the lost coin.
Well, let me intro the first two verses.
Okay.
Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near him to listen to him. And both the Pharisees and the scribes began to grumble, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." Now, a lot of people know about the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the lost son, but most of them haven't read what inspired Jesus to tell
this story.
Well, the inspiration of him telling this story was these tax collectors and sinners. Jesus was talking to them. He was being with them. He even ate with them, and that shows you're on the same level that other person is. So the Pharisees and scribes began to grumble. We don't want him hanging around with those people, and we're not real sure whether we want him hanging around with us. This man receives sinners and eats with them. Now, with that little jumping off the springboard right there, that's where it starts. Jesus saying, I can read their minds and see what they're saying. I'm going to tell them three stories. And like you said a little while ago, the prodigal son is probably the most known parable in the whole Bible. And Jesus told a bunch of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably the longest, too. There are a couple others that are longer, but, I mean, as long. But most of the time, when you ask somebody, give me a parable that Jesus told, they talk about the prodigal son.
Yeah, prodigal son and the Good Samaritan are the two that...
Yes.
But prodigal son, probably, at least among believers, has a greater impact because so many people relate to that part, because they relate to the statement, the very statement that the Pharisees and Sadducees and the lawyers are all upset about. Jesus welcomes sinners and eats with them. That is in that culture, that was radical. Mm-hmm. That would be no different than today if, let's say, a famous minister started hanging out with various groups, and I'll let you put in the group that you think's there, but I mean, I can start listing a lot of names because if some minister started hanging out with the homosexual community or the
black community or
abortion community. If you started hanging out with those people and treated them as equal, I can guarantee you there'd be a business meeting somewhere determining your fate.
Isn't it ironic if we as ministers and evangelists do what Jesus asked us to do, some of the people in our brotherhood are going to be upset about it.
They're going to be totally, they're going to lose it.
Why is he so associating himself with those people? Why does he invite those people to come to church? You know, it's really ironic that that's the way it is in our world.
I know, and you can't help. I mean, I get that if it would make me uncomfortable if all of a sudden there were certain people there and they were being treated as everything was okay. That would be hard for me, because at the same time I read some of the scriptures and I see where Jesus is, hey, don't do that. Don't do that. But
well, in the New Testament, there's such a fine line between I'm going to accept what that person does and I'm going to accept what that person is. Mm-hmm. He's a human being made in the image of God, just like us, just like me. Mm-hmm. So I have a responsibility to treat him like that. But then there's a fine line where somebody says, well, he must just condone everything he does. Just because you sit down and eat with somebody, just because you sit down and have an evening talk somewhere, or get up in the morning and talk about the kingdom before breakfast, just because you do that doesn't mean that you condone everything those other people do.
Absolutely.
Man, we got that stuck in our heads, and we need to get that out.
We need to get that out, because we can we can have relationship with people and not agree, but
well, just in our case, you are so wrong about so many things in the Bible, and I don't hold that against you.
And you. So,
yeah, if the two of us can get along together, that's a good example of some others that might be able to make it through.
Absolutely. And the part that's just, it always makes you uncomfortable when they're, the way Jesus treats some people sometimes, because you begin to then think to yourself, well, okay, why don't I? Why don't I?
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and get to our parable, because you're right. That very statement right there sets up everything that we're about to read.
Exactly, the whole chapter.
Now, do you want to read the first one, or you want me to?
You can read the first two if you want to.
Okay. Verse 3. Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and his neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Now, I know last
Pretty
week,
much to the point, isn't it?
yeah, and I know last week we talked quite a bit about the lost sheep, and you gave some very poignant insight into the part where we just don't. This is not a lost piece of property to this, as far as Jesus is concerned. Mm-hmm. Both of these parables have meaning to them that we don't necessarily grab. The lost sheep, sheep, even to a shepherd, the value that they held to a community was huge, because without them, they die.
And that was their occupation.
I mean, not only
your
did
wealth is based on how many sheep you got.
Well, your very survival depended on if you had enough sheep.
Yeah.
Because not only did they provide you with food and milk, they provided you with clothing. They provided you with everything you need, and they also became sort of like a pet to some degree. The lost coin, I didn't realize this, but in their culture, a lot of women, their dowry was consisted of 10 coins. And it was, and sometimes they would actually be where you've seen the necklaces with the coins. But the coins would have been passed down from mother to daughter, daughter to and so forth. And it not just had a value related to it as far as a coin, but it had greater value to that woman who would then lose the one coin that would then negate the greater value of the 10 coin.
It would complete the value.
Yeah, it makes the set.
Yeah.
Okay? When they heard that this supposed woman had 10 silver coin, loses one, their first thought is, okay, she's just destroyed her dowry. Mm-hmm. She has messed up the value of the whole thing. It's just not like she lost one coin. She just messed everything up. And who's she going to give it to now? It's incomplete. She might as well spend the rest of it.
And since you mentioned that makes sense, because the value of the story would be exactly the same if it was a man who lost a coin. But if it's something special to her, and like you said, makes a complete set.
I've lost coins. I haven't spent all day looking for them.
Both of these shorter parables, and we'll get to the bigger one afterwards, but both of these shorter parables are based on one word, and that word is lost.
Yeah.
Lost is a horrible word. If you've ever been lost, if you've ever been hiking with your family members and you got lost in the woods and you get turned around and don't know where you are, if you get lost in a crowd, like you lose a little kid in a crowd somewhere, it's an awful, awful feeling. I have a real good friend that I used to run with all the time, and Jimmy said, "I've never been lost." And he had 5% vision. He ran up through the woods all the time on these trails. He said, "I've never been lost." He said, "I was confused for a couple hours one time, but I've never been lost." It's an awful feeling to be lost. And obviously here too, the lamb didn't know he was lost, and the coin obviously doesn't know that he or she is lost. But the people who have those two things as part of their value, They knew they were lost. They knew that they had.
They knew they were no longer where they were supposed to be.
Yeah.
And here's the important point. Well, this point is through all three parables. The one who had the whatever it was, the sheep, the coin, the son, was doing everything they could to get it back. The coin's gone, the sheep's gone, and they're doing everything they can to go get it. And then we come to the last one. And the father, it doesn't seem like he's doing everything that he can, but he's doing what he needs to do in order for the son to come back. But, hey, the value is the same in all three stories. Someone's not where they're supposed to be.
And in that lostness, there's a shepherd and there's a lady and there's a father who are in the lostness of the other people in the story who would do anything to fix that situation.
Yeah, they don't want it.
Yeah.
It's not.
And the coin's not going to make that decision, and the sheep's not going to make that decision.
No.
But the son, and then there's another son in the second one, in the third parable. And he talks about what's going on in heaven when these people repent.
Oh, I know. Isn't that great?
Yeah.
There's more rejoicing over one who repents and comes back than for the 99 that's already there.
So, a lost coin and a lost sheep. Do you have anything else to say about those two things that are lost before we go to the big parable?
No. I think we'll be going back to them from the last one too.
Right. Well, I'd like to read the first 4 verses because there's something in there I want to point out that I didn't see for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me. And he divided his wealth between them. Well, let's just stop right there. I bet you, if you went out on the street and said, do you ever read the Bible? And he said, yeah. Do you ever hear the story of the prodigal son? Yes. And by the way, the word prodigal means wasteful. So this kid was going to waste what his father gave him as far as his inheritance was concerned. He divided his wealth between them. I bet you the average person walking down the street, even holding a Bible, would not be able to tell you that. And I read this parable for years and years and never saw it. I had a professor at Harding who said, if you come to a common passage, if you come to a passage that you're familiar with, do not skip over it.
Yeah.
Because if you skip over it, you're going to miss something. And look at the B part of verse 12. And he, the father, divided his wealth between them.
Yeah.
The other son.
Yeah, the other son got his share too.
I always looked at it just giving the younger kid his, and then he leaves, and he divides it at the same time.
Yep.
And gives one his inheritance, and the other one gets his inheritance too.
And of course, the culture would have realized that the older son got twice as much as the younger son. So the older son is now wealthy.
I kept trying to explain that to my dad, and he never did understand.
Do you want to keep on?
Why don't you read for a while, starting with 13.
And not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. And after he spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I'm starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." So he got up and went to his father. I'm going to stop right there.
Okay, let's stop right there for a minute.
There's too much stuff.
Yeah. As we said a few minutes ago, this is probably the longest parable that Jesus ever taught. and one that's most familiar with people in contrast to a lot of others that people never even heard of before. But it goes back to this word lost. And it's real easy to focus the spotlight on the son, on the younger son, and to say it's a story of the prodigal son. He was wasteful, he made some bad decisions, but he ended up going back to his father. It's real easy to look at that and say, well, I know what I would have done. Remember how we've talked about it in the past?
Find yourself in the story.
Who are you in this parable? Yeah. Well, it's pretty obvious that most of us in the parable are this kid who made bad decisions. But the other son's going to make some bad decisions too, and we'll get there in a little bit.
Yeah. Well, we have a very, it would be considered today a very popular narrative. I mean, a child decides they don't want to be under the parents' rule. They want to be on their own, and they demand compensation to head out. And
Rodney Dangerfield said his son told him one time, "I'm running away from home." And Dangerfield went, "On your mark, set." Yeah, sometimes we think that, and it does. I mean, if kids make decisions like that, I don't want to be with my mom and dad anymore, I want to live with somebody else, or I just would rather not see them the rest of my life. Yeah, those are bad decisions that you need to work on. But that is also demonstrated, and there's nothing in here that says, what was the father thinking?
yeah,
I can tell you what the father was thinking, even though it's not in here. Every day he looked down that road.
he was wondering.
Every
He was
day,
concerned.
every day he was praying, is this the day he comes back?
Well, I was thinking to myself, today, our modern version of the prodigal son happens about every fall when parents load up vehicles with supplies and their kids go off to college. Because today, parents send their kids off to college, and within 4 years, a lot of them don't even recognize their kids anymore.
No kid.
And
It
so
happens all the time.
it happens all the time. In fact, there is, and some may never come back, and some may come back different. But they all will be in some way or another. They won't be the child that they had when they packed the car that day. I don't care how it goes. That child is not coming back.
Well, in that analogy, let me put you on the spot. Why do you think this younger kid wanted to leave his house? Why do you think he asked for the money and then left, or whatever he got, and then left his home? What do you think was going through the father's mind while this kid going through his mind was trying to figure out whether he wanted to stay or leave?
Honestly, the only answer I can give is probably from my own experiences of life, relatable to that, my feelings, was looking for the freedom to decide for myself what I wanted to do in life. Sort of like Adam and Eve. I think that innate feeling, I want to decide. I don't want someone else to decide. I want to decide what's right, what's wrong, what I can do, what I don't want to do, what's good, what's bad. I want to decide.
And that big lie that was in the Garden of Eden,
Yep.
you shall not surely die,
Yeah.
because you will be like gods.
Yeah.
Oh man,
What power.
that's pretty. People talk about the fruit. That's not what
Hey, what?
tempting. No. Okay, that's done. No, when
What
Satan
the fruit represented was what was.
Yes, and when Satan said, "You won't die," he lied to you. You won't die. They got to figure out who's telling the truth.
Yeah, well, there's a confusion over the various forms of death there. I mean, they did die instantly. They were separated from God, and that is the definition of death.
They were.
They were, so.
And
So-
in your analogy, when you said, they're trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives, and they think they can't do it at home. Can't can't do it at home because mom and dad are just so oppressive, and they make rules for me, and they have groundwork that they make for me.
Well,
all the
there's
time.
guilt comes with it. I don't want guilt. You know?
Yeah, and I can't believe my dad and mom are that stupid. I mean, let's just get serious about it here for a minute. That's what most teenagers think. I can't believe mom and dad are that dumb.
Yep.
And then you start, after you have kids, you're going, well, maybe they weren't as dumb as I thought they were.
And of course, the young son doesn't take long, as it never takes long. People don't even begin. When you are not, as one of my favorite lines from Barney Fife, from Andy Griffith, he ain't from around here. When people looked at that young man and saw that they knew he wasn't from around here,
Yeah.
they went to work and they cleaned him out for every dime, penny, whatever he had. And all of a sudden now, he has no friends. And he is living, and what worse circumstance could a young son of a Jewish family be put in than he is?
Working
He
with the
can't even
hogs.
eat what the pigs are eating, but that's where he's living. He's living with the pigs.
The father doesn't argue with him. He just says, I'm going to give you what you've asked me to give you. He divides his wealth between both the sons. Not many days later, the younger son, so it didn't take him very long to say, you know what, I got everything that I was supposed to get in the real estate business here. I got all the treasures I was supposed to get. I got all the inheritance that I was supposed to get. I might as well just leave.
Yep.
Because why stay around? Because I'm not going to get anything else. There, verse after verse after verse is the kid thinking the wrong thing.
Yes.
Looking at what his life is like and then going, I think I'll do the opposite.
Yeah, I can do better.
Got a great home, I'm leaving. Got a great dad, I'm leaving. Don't work very well with my other brother, I'm getting out of here.
Yeah.
Everything that he should be working on to make it better, to make his life better, he just kind of throws out the window.
And there's another thing too. What he should have been satisfied with, he wasn't. He wasn't. Well, let's get on down because
Verse 13 says he got rid of all his estate. And if you ever have lived by yourself, alone, with no salary coming in, it doesn't take very long for you to not have any money.
no, it doesn't.
And when you don't have any money, you don't have any groceries, when you don't have a car, etc., etc. This kid didn't have anything. The word that Luke uses in verse 13 is he squandered his estate.
Yeah.
And did yours say wicked living or loose living? What did it say?
Wild living.
Wild living. Okay.
Yeah.
Do we need to talk about what wild living is?
No, I think everybody's got a pretty
Everybody
good.
probably has a pretty good, yeah.
Well, let's go on down to verse 17. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate.
That's a good place to stop.
Man,
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot again. What was he thinking about? Well, let's go back to that one verse where it said he came to his senses. Can you find that for me?
17.
17. Every time I read when he came to his senses, this is what I think of. In the cartoons, you know, when the light bulb goes on, click like that. Oh, yeah, I see it.
Yep.
And
Oh, I could have had a V8. Kind of. Kyle.
That's this way.
Yeah, Cal Idleman wrote a book entitled Aha Moments. And it's just like, you know,
And we're not told how long he was gone. He might have been gone a month. He might have been gone 10 years.
Yeah, it could have been a long time.
Yeah.
We have no earthly idea. Because I have seen people who it takes a long time for them to have that aha moment. Because I'm one of those people. I've gone a long time thinking, well, it's not so bad in here with the pigs, but at some point, you have the moment.
Yeah.
I heard an alcoholic put it one time. He said, I have never met anyone who's quit until they can tell me the moment. That moment.
That's where it started.
Verse 17.
Yeah.
Because unless they tell me that moment, he says, I know it's not real.
When the light bulb goes on, and he says, and verse 18 is kind of interesting because there are not too many people in the Bible who had the courage to say, I've sinned.
No.
And he said, the kid said, Father, I have sinned against you. Unquestionably, my decisions were awful. They were bad. They had everything against them, and I still made those rotten decisions.
I love how Jesus puts it in the story, because I'm fairly positive that this would have caught the Pharisees' ears. I have sinned against heaven and against you. Implying, because the Pharisees had already determined a lot of times who was sinning, who wasn't sinning, who was right, who was...
They had to make that definition because they said Jesus is eating with sinners.
Yeah. So, and Jesus immediately makes a point to denote that, hey, this young man realizes not only did he sin against his father, he sinned against his God Father.
Yes.
So that is a powerful, powerful moment.
And is getting the props knocked from underneath him too in verse 19 when he said, I'm not even worthy to be called your son anymore.
Just make me a slave.
Yeah,
I'm
sorry I took my inheritance and messed it all up. So just make me a slave.
Yeah, I know the word says servant, but that's our modern day version of that word. It actually meant, make me a slave. At least I can eat. I'll have some place to sleep. I can still see you. I know the pristine relationship that I had in the beginning is gone. But can I just be home again?
Like I told you, I had a professor that said, don't skip over familiar parts. Read everything, whether you think you know it. I tell you what, always, when I read this, which I've read it a few times in my life.
Oh, yeah.
Every time, I'll tell you what really jumps up out at me. He's eating corn husks.
Yeah.
Not even the corn, just the husk, the outside of the corn. And I'm trying to think, how long would I last just eating that? He got down to the bottom of the barrel, and that's what he was eating.
Yeah.
Hog slop.
Yep.
And
I fed a few hogs in my life, and I can remember a few times looking down at that and thinking to myself, the story.
That's what he was eating.
And I was like, man, you'd have to be hungry to eat that. I mean, you would have to be really, really hungry.
No kidding. No kidding.
Yep.
You probably wouldn't eat it unless you were on Naked and Afraid.
And of course, your favorite line in there, because we have got to get going.
There's a line that says we got to get going?
No, I'm just looking at our watch clock. The father sees him from a long way. You made the statement earlier about the fact of wonder what the father was doing during this period of time.
Yeah.
He was looking for his son because he noticed him from a far distance. So that means that every day that father was there looking for him, and of course we all know the Jewish references to the various symbols that Jesus is using here, the robe, the sandals, the ring, the fatted calf. They all represent a symbolic gesture in a family dynamic.
And good things in his life compared to what he had out in the wilderness.
Yeah, I mean, it's like all of a sudden his his world has gone from, I mean, he was willing to be a slave, and he's been restored.
Now, we'll try to study this next week, but I'm going to put you on the spot again. Who was upset that the prodigal son came home? Who was it?
The calf.
The fatted calf. He wasn't happy about it at all. And you know what? It would be a great disservice if we would try to cover that last paragraph.
I'm not going to. We'll just have to put it
We'll
off
have to use that next week. Say,
because we still left a lot of meat on the bone on this particular story. I honestly, like I told you, I've read a couple 100-page books on this parable. So there is a lot of stuff there, because like I said to you.
well, there's still about 10 more verses about the son.
Yeah.
The other son.
And not even counting the fact, what does anybody who's lived this part of the story, who's been the wasteful son, who threw up their face and said, I don't want that, God, I'm on my own. You get to that part and you have the aha moment and you come back, you actually expect to be treated like second-class citizens.
Yep.
Maybe third.
That's all he wanted.
But all you want is the feeling that I still am loved and belong to God, to my Father. I want that broken relationship, though it's going to be less. I just still want it.
Yeah. Because there probably was a time in his life when he thought it was never going to get fixed.
Yeah.
I've messed up so bad, how can I fix this?
I mean, I don't even want me.
Yeah.
I don't even want myself.
And as an assignment for next week, let me suggest one thing that as you read this, as we're all going to read it together this week, this older son, this older son, I turned to the wrong chapter in my Bible. This older son was not real happy that the younger son came home. And do you remember how, this is your assignment for next week, do you remember how the older son knew that his brother had come back home? Remember what Jesus says in the parable?
He heard him from afar off.
He heard a celebration and dancing.
Yeah.
And then the next verse says, Jesus said, hey, what are y'all dancing for? You're not supposed to be dancing.
Quit that. You're not supposed to be having that kind of fun today. Will you quit? I mean, I know David did it, but I've always heard that was in the Old Testament. But anyway. Yeah, this is without a doubt one of the most, maybe one of the best stories for anyone who wants to hear the story of salvation and the concept of what it means to God as the Father. And don't worry about...
How many stories in the Old Testament, New Testament, and personal stories that you and I know, other ministers, other churches have known, that one phrase that we ought to think about over and over again, look up because your son's coming home.
That's right.
That kind of reconciliation, and all reconciliation, if it's good, it obviously is good, but to have a father-son get back together again when the younger son just about hated his dad and everything he stood for.
Yeah, the couple of the points we didn't mean, in Jewish society, that would have been, I know that people have ever watched a movie when someone tears the cloth that says that, they're dead to them.
Yeah.
What the young son did to his father was basically said to him, Dad, you're dead to me. Give me what I'm coming to me, because I'm out of here. I know that doesn't say that, but to the Jewish people, that's what that meant.
And another thing that just jumps out at us in both the first part of the story and the second part of the story is, how in the world do these people admit that, this kid coming back, he has to admit that he made a big mistake.
Oh yeah. Well, we're getting back to our first part, the very first question. Jesus welcomed sinners and ate with them.
The humility that Jesus...
And they're about to have a party. eating with a bunch of sinners. Or
Even with
one.
celebration and a bunch of dancing?
Yeah, but
It was
evidently.
probably square dancing.
Yeah, square dancing. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us. We will continue this particular parable and do our best, even though this is a tough one, for us to not pick at the little pieces of it. We'll be back next week and hopefully we'll get through it. Have anything you want to add before we close it up?
No, just please read the parable a couple times this week. It's something that you do not want to just jump over and ignore.
It's too much.
It is the parable that most people know about, and I'm guessing, this is just a pure guess, if Jesus were sitting in that chair and Mark and I said, "What's your favorite parable?" I think I know what he'd say. We'll study it next week.
So, on behalf of Steve and I, goodbye. We'll see you next week. God bless.